overall, how effective was this? You were talking about 100 ballistic missiles and 30 cruise missiles, and then we had, you said, several hundred slow-moving drones. How were the drones eliminated?
Well, again, I want to emphasize that I'm now in the private sector, so I don't have the 100% accuracy of what was done on Saturday, but I will give you my assessment of it.
All right.
And my assessment is that the drones, as moving as slow as they were likely taken out by aircraft. Meaning fighter aircraft. The Israelis fly F-35s, which is the highest technology aircraft that has a stealth capability. They also fly F-15s and F-16s, of course, all sold to the Israelis by the United States, and we partner with them and train with their Air Force. Their pilots come to the United States to train, and the United States Air Force trains with the Israelis as well in a lot of those exercises that I referenced earlier. So my guess would be that the slow-moving drones were taken out by aircraft, and I've seen reports that a lot of that took place over the airspace of the country of Jordan, because they were slow moving and could be received. So that's to your question about the drones. You asked about percentage effectiveness. I have seen the press reports that it was 99% effective, and if there were 300 total projectiles, if we're going to include drones and missiles together, fired at Israel, and let's say it was somewhere between 98 and 99% effective, that means that somewhere between 3 and 6 did actually land in Israeli territory or in Jordanian territory, even if they weren't aiming for Jordan.
Yeah, and there were no fatalities that we know of, right?
That's correct. I actually just saw reports this morning that there was one injury to a young girl, an Israeli girl who lived in the Negev. Luckily for her, I shouldn't say luckily, but on the positive side for her, she was not hit with a direct hit of a missile, which likely, unfortunately, anyone who was underneath the direct hit of a missile would not survive. She was hit with shrapnel from one of the large missiles that was intercepted. And unfortunately, when you intercept a missile, there are still large metal pieces and fragments that have to fall to the earth. And so it sounds like she was hit with that. But if you think of things altogether, 300 projectiles and over 130 missiles fired at Israel, if there is only one injury, then that is a pretty positive outcome in shooting down those missiles.
So when these F-35s and F-15s and 16s took out the drones, were they doing that one at a time? Were they doing it with machine gun fire from the fighters, or how were they taking those out? Because that's several hundred of those things. So that's like bird hunting.
Yeah, my guess is they were probably using birdshot rather than buckshot.
Yeah.
But I think that the U.S. also placed aircraft carriers in the region, which means that we were likely flying our aircraft, the F-18s that fly off of naval aircraft carriers, as well as U.S. F-35s and F-15s that fly out of our air bases in the Arabian Peninsula, would have been there to help on those as well. When you ask about one at a time, I don't know the exact method that they use, but when those drones were slow moving, they were really not much of a match for any aircraft, whether it was a 15, a 16, a U.S. F-18 off of a naval aircraft, or a Israeli F-35 or a U.S. F-35. I mean, they're used to fighting other fast-moving aircraft in a dogfight, not a slow-moving drone. Which is why I said what I said at the beginning. Just my analysis from reading the press was the drones were sent as a diversion, thinking that was going to be the only attack, and then the missiles came right afterwards, attempting to actually hit civilians in Israel.
Yeah. And how big are those drones?
Well, I don't know the exact size of the drones the Iranians used, but they could be, U.S. drone size is the size of a small airplane, but then we also have very small drones that are used for surveillance and other non-lethal drones that can be quite small, that only have, let's say, 3 to 5 feet wingspan. So the Iranians could have used both of those. I haven't seen reports which ones they did, but the fact that they were slow moving, my guess is they used their less expensive option because they were on a kamikaze mission. None of them were intended to return back to Iran.
Right, right. Now, is this an embarrassment to Iran? I mean, when they, I mean, they launch 130 missiles, hundreds of drones. Is this an embarrassment to them to fail so badly, or was this a gesture? Maybe that's not the right way to phrase that, but did they not want to inflict severe damage on Israel? Was this a kind of a desperate gesture, or was this just a terrible failure on their part?
Well, I would put it this way. My sense in their goals in attacking Israel was one to inflict pain on Israel, and two to continue to exacerbate the what their perception is the isolation of Israel. And in both of those goals, they have failed miserably. Number one, as we discussed earlier, there was one injury in Israel and nobody killed, which we're thankful for. Number two, instead of further isolating Israel, which, we can have a discussion after this, I don't believe Israel is isolated at all. The United States continues to be its strongest ally. But in their attempt of that, they have actually reversed and had a 180-degree reversal or failure of that goal. Because what we saw on Saturday evening was not just the Israelis defending their territory and shooting down those missiles and drones, but working together with a coalition that we know 100% was the United States. We know that it included the British and the French, and there are other partners in the Middle East that participated that for reasons of their own internal politics do not want to take public credit for doing so, and we respect that. But the fact that it was a coalition defending Israel against an Iranian attack says to me that one of the Iranian goals was a miserable failure.
Well, that certainly seems like it to me. I do want to talk about the Iron Dome because this is something that is fascinating to me, and I've heard so much about it, but this is something that kind of sat dormant for a good while. Is that correct?
Yes. So the Iron Dome is a technology that the Israelis worked on for a number of years, facing the short-range rockets that we spoke about earlier coming out of Gaza and out of Lebanon. And their technology was one that was being built, and they had sought support from the United States going back as far to the year 2008. And unfortunately, at that time, there was a test that was taken by the United States Department of Defense at the Pentagon down at Redstone Arsenal, where we test our missile defense systems. And it came back at that time that it was not as effective as the United States would have wanted to see it. And it was more expensive than initially thought. So at that point, it was rejected by the Department of Defense prior to the time when I started serving at the Secretary of Defense's office.
And then how did it come back online and get started again?
When I first came to the Secretary of Defense's office at the Department of Defense, there was a file that was on my desk, so to speak, my figurative desk as the head of the U.S.-Israel defense relationship at that time in 2009. And it had been rejected, as I mentioned. And at that time, Israel had taken rocket fire from Gaza, hitting schools in an area called Sderot, where children had been killed and families had many injured. And I had seen this system as a possibility to be able to shoot down those rockets, but saw that it was rejected. And I began doing some more research into it and met often with our counterparts in the Israeli Defense Forces, where they raised the Iron Dome as a possibility to be able to counter that as well. One particular officer who was there. As you know, every country in their embassy in Washington sends a defense attaché, usually a officer from their army or military that will work with the Pentagon based out of their embassy. And at that point in time, in 2009, the defense attaché working out of the embassy of Israel was a younger general by the name of Benny Gantz. I raise his name now because he went on further to both lead the Israeli Defense Forces as the head of those forces, and then to become the Minister of Defense of Israel. And he is now serving in the Israeli Knesset and is part of the what they call their war cabinet. He joined together with the government after October 7th to ensure that there would be unity in the decisions made by the Israeli government. But at that point, General Gantz would meet with me often at the Pentagon, and we would discuss a range of issues where the United States and Israel could cooperate, to include those exercises I referred to earlier. And he told me that the Iron Dome had been improved since the first test in 2008, where it was not as effective previously, and said that if there were to be an additional test, that it would prove much more effective. So at that point in time, I went forward to the leaders within the Pentagon to discuss that with him. And well, I know you've had many interactions with U.S. Generals and admirals, and
Yes.
There are let's put it this way, not a lot of opportunities if
Yeah.
if something has failed once to get a second chance.
You don't get a lot of second bites at the apple with that gang.
That is correct. That is correct. So I had a few, let's say, figurative doors slammed in my face and physical ones, and a few naysayers that said this is never gonna be effective. We tested it already, and it wasn't. But I persevered because I understood not only that General Gantz put his reputation on the line by telling me that this had been improved, but also that those civilians that were being fired at in southern Israel did not need to live their life that way. That's not what either Secretary of Defense Gates at the time or President Obama at the time wanted to see happen. And then I also thought to myself that if we are able to advance a technology like the Iron Dome, not only would it be able to be used to protect civilians in Israel, but it would be able to be used in the future to protect American troops, American civilians, and other allies around the world. And so I continued to push and persevere, and eventually convinced Secretary Gates that we needed a second test on the Iron Dome system. And I worked together. I don't want to take sole credit myself. At the time, I was working very closely with Undersecretary of Defense Michelle Flournoy and the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense at the time, Colin Call, to make sure that we could advance that test. And the good news is that that test came back successful. We went back down to Redstone Arsenal in Alabama, and the missile defense experts in the United States Army retested the Iron Dome system. And at this point, it came back with much better results, very successful on the test. And then we knew from the United States military that this system would be effective, and that should it be able to be fielded, it would help in shooting down rockets that are fired at Israel, and really changing the entire way that the Israelis have to deal with attacks that are coming in short-range rocket, and potentially changing the way the United States deals with short-range rocket fire at that point.